So one of the pieces of advice that I got as I was telling my friends and family that I was giving this talk was start with an inspirational quote. So I figured that this would be a good place to start. This is what I heard from my roommate when I told him I'd be giving this talk. He said, "Whoa, dude, you are definitely not smart enough to talk about that." So you're welcome. I hope that you feel as inspired as I did upon hearing that. But I think actually a more useful place to start would be with this statement here. I think it sums up really well what our hopes and dreams are as a society for what data can do for us. We really do think that there's no problem that's too big for data to solve, and I'm definitely inclined to agree. I'm an unabashed fan of big data. But I do think it's interesting that there's a really closely related statement that we don't hear nearly as frequently, and it's this, that there's no problem too small for data to solve. Why is it that we give such a culturally privileged position to that first sentiment, often at the expense of the second? It's an interesting question, and when we dive in, what I think we encounter are a series of myths. And these myths govern the way that we think about data and the way that we think that data relates to us on a personal and everyday level. So we're actually going to be just dispensing with those myths today. And we're going to use that as kind of our springboard for our discussion of small data. And so the first myth is this, that data must be big to be powerful. We hear this so frequently, that big data is going to help us solve the world's problems. And that's an excellent sentiment. It has that kind of just unabashed optimism to it about what big data can help us do. But what we do is we make the small intellectual leap that has immense implications to think that data has to be big to help us solve the world's problems. What we should be doing instead is thinking about what big data can do for us, and then think about how we can replicate that usefulness in our smaller data sets. So one really great example of what big data can help us do is make connections between disparate and seemingly unrelated data points and with some powerful implications. A great example actually is on this slide here. What our friends at Target did was they found that people who bought this particular basket of goods 5 to 7 months down the road would be purchasing a different basket of goods, one that included things like diapers and cribs and baby formula. So what they decided to do was they started to mail those customers, in particular, things like coupons for those goods that they knew they would be buying. They did this because they knew that consumer buying behavior is particularly malleable during those first couple of weeks and months of new parenthood. So, it got them into a little bit of hot water with privacy advocates for obvious reasons. These people had never told Target that they were expecting children. But regardless of how you feel about the kind of ethics of the situation, we can definitely agree that this is a new and novel way to think about what big data can do. But what if we're not looking to make connections like Target made? What if we're not looking to connect disparate data points? Instead, what if we're just looking to find more efficient and effective means of charting relationships and connections that everyday experience or even just common sense have told us already exist? So we're going to start really small, and it's going to be a little strange at the start, but bear with me. It'll be worth it, I promise. So this is a data set that my dog might generate. My dog, even though my mom thinks he's extremely intelligent, is not, and he eats grass almost constantly on a weekly basis and then gets sick. He is almost 8 years old, and he's thus far not failed to see the connection between the two things, even though it's so obvious to us, right? And I'm willing to bet that we don't need a spreadsheet to see this connection. But what if I told you that this is actually about the limit of what your brain is capable of handling on its own? Miller's Law, which is one of the more frequently cited examples in modern psychology, states that we can hold about 7 items plus or minus 2 in our heads and use those items actively in our memories to make active decisions. Anything beyond that, we start to see diminishing returns. And even if you're willing to argue, but Mike, I'm super smart. Well, that's great. How many can you hold? Is it 15? Is it 30? Is it 50? It doesn't matter. You're going to reach a point of diminishing returns eventually. And what you want to have in place is a system that's going to help you with your decision making once you can no longer do it just in your head. And you can probably do better than my dog. But this is another example of a set that my dog might make. This is a behavior and response matrix. Don't try to take it all in. We'll actually just take a look at one very small section of it. So if my dog really wanted to make better decisions about how to interact with me, he could take a look at this. And he might want to cluster his behavior on green-green interactions. These are ones where he's actually he likes what he's doing and I like it too. And if he's starting to get into trouble, he can go to the things that he just kind of likes doing and I really like as well. And if he really ends up in the doghouse, he can do these things. Maybe he doesn't like cocking his head to the side, but he's in a lot of trouble and so he really needs to pile it on. So you might not be sold yet because we're still talking about my dog, but what if we actually took a nearly identical data set, a nearly identical system, and instead applied it to small business? What this small business owner might do is they might want to see the way that they can chart and take a look at the relationships between what they do with their customers and the utility that their customers derive from it. So for example, here we have, none of these are particularly easy for him to implement, but if he does, he gets a really positive response. So does this small business owner who just owns one location, does he need that kind of enormous disparate data that Target was able to make those connections with? Sure, it might help, but with his resources, that's really not realistic. Instead, if he's just willing to dive in, roll up his sleeves, and get started, he can come up with an extremely workable data set that can help him start to make better business decisions. And we all have this power. Here's an example from the classroom. So what this is a progress matrix for a math class. And what this does is this actually charts the errors that students make in assessments in these particular skill areas that are listed across the top. So basic arithmetic, solving equations, etc. So we'll just zoom in on one student here and what this can tell us about it. In this system, the students are assessed at the beginning of the year and then are assessed at the end of every unit. And what we can see is their progress throughout the year in these 5 kind of benchmark areas that the teacher decides at the beginning of the year they want to chart. As we can see with this student, they are doing very well in basic arithmetic, but they're really struggling with systems of equations. That's fine. It might be early in the year and they're building to that. We can also see that they did a little bit better in this unit than they did. They increased their overall score by almost 3%. However, their progress was not statistically significant, so it might have just been by chance. But let's look at a class here, for example. So what this has is, what we can do is we can see a class's progress by each of the skills as well. And what this allows the teacher to do is see where not only their individual students are lagging, but also where their classes as a whole might be lagging. And if we can link this data to the practices that are effective for particular students, or the classes that are effective for a particular class, the teacher's then empowered to better intervene. So if they start to see a student lagging behind, but they can see that they respond well to one-on-one tutoring, they can suggest that. If they see that a class works well in pairs or well in groups, and that they've seen great progress in any of these areas at any point with that, they can give that a try and implement that. So let's go back to Mark for a second, he of the inspirational quote. So what did he actually mean when he thought that I wasn't smart enough to give this talk? I think what he was actually giving voice to was a deep-seated doubt that a lot of us have about thinking about data and the way that it relates to us. And that myth is this, that data is for the hyper-brilliant or the math people. And that's really not the case. We've used numbers so far, but let's take a look at this graph right here. This is actually one from my legitimate work right now, where I work at a residential facility for at-risk youth. And what this lets us do is track the way that youth do their homework, just on a daily basis. This is only for 2 weeks. And let's take a look, for example, at this particular student's science grade. He's clearly struggling. He has a D. He has 8 missing assignments. And what we can see is all that yellow, that's bad. When we see a lot of yellow, what that means is that our staff isn't necessarily doing a great job of following up with that student at the end of the day to make sure that their science homework was completed. Clearly, this isn't working out well for this student, and clearly it's our responsibility to then intervene and make sure that we do a better job. Let's also take a look at reading here for a second. It looks pretty good on the surface, right? He's doing pretty well. He's completing his homework. We're following up. He has a good grade. But what actually this could mean is, what if this student, we know for a fact, has low reading ability? What this could mean is that this student isn't being adequately served in school. And that has serious implications for us, as we have a responsibility to advance that student's learning as well. So this could really inform our practice in terms of enrichment or interventions that we want to put into place as well. But look at this. Just even ignoring the bottom row, looking at that, there's not a single number in that. You don't need to be a math person. All you need to do is think about systematically how you can set up your life, or how you can set up systems at work that can better allow you to drive decision making. And this is about 250 data points, give or take, in here. And in a second, you can take it in, and really it can drive change, and it can inform the way that you make decisions. The third myth is that collecting data means using data, or means using technology, or even needing technology. And that's simply not the case. Look at this. This is a picture. This is legitimately from my office. And that huge pile of papers, that's about what we generate in a week. And I go through that, and what I do is I plug all that. That's legitimately the sheets that we use to generate that homework data that I was just taking a look at. Automation is excellent, and believe me, if I had the resources, I would definitely want to automate this process, and maybe someday we will. But in the meantime, if you can get that out of your head, and you can just think about ways to maybe simplify your paper-based data collection, or design systems that make things a little bit easier, again, you're well on your way then to making better decisions about how you can use data in your everyday life, at home, at work, whatever it might be. So our last myth, actually, I didn't make a slide for it because I saved kind of my coup de grace for this. This is the the pinnacle of my spreadsheeting, a friend of mine came to me with a problem. He said, Mike, my fiance, she doesn't like any of the gifts I'm buying for her, and I can't figure out why. And I said, all right, let's figure this out. So what we did was we made a list of all of the occasions for which we bought her presents, and you see that we considered everything we could. We considered the gift itself, the brand identity, the strength of that brand identity, where he was giving it to her, what did they eat when he gave it to her. And what we thought was, if we cracked all this data, we could really figure out how he could make his fiance happy. It's pretty awesome, right? No, it's creepy. This is super creepy. This is also fake. This didn't actually happen. But I put this up here to illustrate what our fourth myth about data is, that we really have some deep misgivings about having our behavior quantified, about having predictions made about us based upon our characteristics that have been charted. And I think that that's a problem because we really ignore the potential that data can have to inform us about ourselves. So let's take a look at this last model here. So this is during a particularly troubling time in my life, someone recommended to me that I should keep a journal. And the reason they said that was because they said it would allow me to externalize my feelings and process through them a little bit better. It turns out I don't actually have particularly strong emotional reasoning. And it was a lifesaver. It really allowed me to take control of my mental health in a way that I didn't have the capacity to do before. But then it obviously occurred to me, if I could keep a journal, why don't I keep a spreadsheet? So what this helps me do is, along the left, you'll see my emotional well-being on that day. And then it's a list of all the factors that I know personally for a fact do affect the way that I feel on a daily basis. Everything from how much sleep I'm getting to whether or not I'm consuming caffeine, what my stress level is like at work, what things are like how things are going in the relationships in my life. And what this allows me to do is even better than a journal. This should never replace a journal, but it can be an excellent tool that can help. And it can help make us think about ourselves in new and more productive ways. See, that last myth about data, the problem with it is that it makes us think that data reduces us. It makes us think about how the ways that it can break us down into smaller pieces that we are absolutely convinced can never add up to the person that we know we are. And I think that that's wrong. I think we need to think about the ways that data can make us better, that it can lift us up, that it can see the ways that we connect with ourselves and our world in more powerful ways. It'll make us better workers, better teachers, better thinkers, and ultimately, and hopefully, better people. And if that goal sounds a little bit too unrealistic or a little bit too ambitious, or for lack of a better word, too big, then that's okay. Remember, we can always start small. Thank you.